The monsoon should start any day now, but the long-term water forecast for the state just got worse.
But for January 1 of 2019, the projection for Lake Mead elevation went down by 20 feet.
And now it's close to an official shortage of water in the lake. But people aren't waiting for that designation, they're getting ready now.
Using about the same volume of water that we used in the mid-1980s is pretty impressive, but it's even more impressive when you think that we're serving over 200,000 more people.
It's not all up to governments. Water conservation can start as close as your laundry room.
He put a switch on it so that I can have it go out to the landscape.
Falling water levels and what we can all do to save the precious resource. This is Arizona Week. Hello and welcome to Arizona Week. I'm Christopher Conover in for Lorraine Rivera. Snowfall and rain were good this winter in the upper Colorado River Basin, allowing water managers a sigh of relief. But the good news didn't last long.
So we had good snowpack throughout the winter, but it got drier and warmer than normal. And so instead of the water from the snow making it into the river and into Lake Powell, it evaporated into the air.
That reduction in the amount of water flowing into the Colorado River led the Federal Bureau of Reclamation to change its forecast for the amount of water in Lake Mead.
We are still in good shape for January 1 of 2018, but for January 1 of 2019, the projection for Lake Mead elevation went down by 20 feet. So we are projecting to be only 1.5 feet above the shortage trigger in January 1, 2019. The official decision is made in the month of August for the following year.
If a shortage is declared, we'll see less Colorado River water for the state.
If it falls below the trigger, Arizona loses about 11% of its Colorado River entitlement, about 320,000 acre feet out of 2.8 million. Water banking and replenishment of groundwater will be cut, and agricultural water users who have their water delivered by the Central Arizona Project, Maricopa Pinal, and some in Pima County will lose about half of their Colorado water supply.
Those estimates can change, but in the meantime, water officials continue to stress awareness and conservation. The Watershed Management Group has a living lab to show people what they can do.
We're here at the Living Lab and Learning Center, and we do teach a lot of things, mainly community efforts on water conservation and seeing rain as a resource. The main source of water for the Living Center is the rain. The rooftops become very, very important for one system, which is an active system, but also the landscape that you see is important for the passive systems. So there is several ways to collect rainwater or to harvest the water from an active to a passive systems, and we have that to show people what are those things influencing Tucson, but also influencing your economy in your house, but also influencing water conservation. And we do this in order to see, our end goal is to see the Santa Cruz River flow again. When it rains here at the Living Lab, pretty much all the water, once the cisterns are filled, they need to overflow somewhere. So they overflow here. So this is what we call a hybrid system between a passive and the connectivity with the active system. Imagine you have a bunch of people in the backyard of your home for a gathering, for a carne asada or for a burger, and people wash their hands, and they want to do stuff and they get dirty. So instead of them going inside any regular bathroom, you can wash your hand in the backyard of your house with this wonderful structure. The name is Tippy Tap. So the Tippy Tap functions like this. It's water coming out, it's soap. You wash it again, and boom, it's done. So people don't need to go inside your house, and they have clean hands, and they're ready to eat more tacos. So a Tippy Tap is very simple. It's 1, 2, 3 poles, 1 gallon, strain, and soap. The most expensive thing is the soap. So it's like $1 or less than that. If any home does this in the backyards of Tucson, we're saving thousands of gallons of water. 30 people can wash their hands with 1 gallon of water. So here we're going to see our systems for drinking water, for potable water. Same thing, we get the water from the roof, we divert the big solids on this rain head. We have something new here. It's the first flush that captures the sediment of the roof. It's kind of cleaning up the first quarter of an inch, cleaning up the roof. Then cleaner water goes into that big cistern, which is a 10,000 gallon cistern. Once the water is in the cistern, it comes to this filtration system. We have a pump. We have 2 filters here, carbon-based. One is 25 microns. It goes to 5 microns. Then it goes into a UV light filtration. After that, it's drinkable. So how do you harvest? How do you collect the rain? Well, first thing, you start at the top, which usually in a home is a rooftop. The rain hits the roof, it comes into the gutter, it comes into the first filtration, which is the rain head, which is mainly a leaf diverter. Which is this screen. It gets the big solids in there, and so that way this is not in the tank. So this is the first filtration we use for these tanks. This is the things we need to clean up right after each rain event, same as the gutter. So this is a PVC pipe that comes into the tank. This is a 420-gallon tank, and the water is collected in here. As simple as that. So let's see if we actually have some water, because it hasn't been raining in Tucson since March, I believe, and we are in June. There is water right here. And as you can see, the water is pretty clean. Look at that. So it's perfect for irrigation. And these tanks are made for that. If you have a garden, this water is beautiful for that. So let's use the rainwater to irrigate our backyards. The purpose of this, not to use potable water to irrigate plants. And rainwater is much better for plants than potable water. There is a rule of thumb. You have 1,000 square footage of surface, you have 1 inch of rain, you get 600 gallons. Like if you have a big yard with a lot of fruit trees, that water will be good water for, let's say, 600 gallons is around 10 days. It just depends. It just depends of the demand of water for that particular home. And just to give you an idea, a fig tree requires 3,000 to 4,000 gallons a year. So what happens once the tank is full of water, which it can happen after 1 inch of rain? So each tank has to have an overflow. Every system has to have an overflow. This is the overflow. So the tank is full, water gets out, and it overflows on that green popper that is over there. Using the overflow, when it's raining, this is a pop-up. So the water will come out of here, it will just pop, and water will come out of here. Once the rain or the overflow stops, this goes up. The idea is that our 10,000 gallon cistern that we have here in the back is to provide for all the needs of the living lab, from landscape to people needs.
Making the decision to reduce your water usage doesn't have to mean a change in your lifestyle. In fact, for one Tucson couple who retired to the Sonoran Desert in 2015, the decision was easy.
We knew that we lived in the desert, and we'd both grown up in the Midwest. And when we bought the house, this whole yard was a sand pit, literally like a sandbox, or you see people's front yards that are just dirt. And it was sad.
Kathy wanted color in her yard and found a magazine that had exactly what she wanted.
There's my chiltepine bush.
But when she talked with consultants, they laughed and said no.
These are not viable plants. These are not native plants to this area. And if you want to have a green garden, you got to be smart about it and use the water from the sky. Water's expensive, it's a diminishing resource, and so you've got lots of opportunities to have what you want and still utilize it efficiently.
So Kathy and her husband put in 2 large cisterns in a narrow section of their yard. The 1,000 gallons of water helps keep the garden growing, though it's run out of water until the monsoon arrives. But not to worry, there's a solution for that.
When we decided to have the laundry to landscape system in, I had a plumber come in and give me some information about how it works or what I needed to do. I wasn't interested in like big excavation or reconstruction. And he said, you got to pick a plumber that has done this before and can explain it to people like me. And all he did was he took the water that comes out of the washer, and instead of directly going into the sewer, he put a switch on it so that I can have it go out to the landscape, or if we're doing something with chlorine, we would go to the sewer.
The piping runs out of the house and to 2 fruit trees and some other plants.
I space out the laundry now so that in this heat like this, I water them maybe 3 times a week. It's just so dry and hot. Some of the cactus and succulents will come back because they know that they're being starved right now. But the fruit trees need water, and I've harvested about 20 peaches so far.
2 years later, no regrets.
Oh yeah, so happy. When it rains here, I come out and do a little happy dance when my cistern is overflowing. I've taken videos of my own river back here because the overpour goes over here and along the basins, waters all the plants, and then shoots out the back. It's just a thing to behold.
Putting in the cisterns and the gray water system for the laundry does cost money. Kathy's water provider, Tucson Water, offers rebates to help defer the costs. Fernando Molina with Tucson Water sat down with us to talk about the success of that rebate program.
We have about 100 or so applicants each year for our residential gray water program. Compared to the rainwater harvesting, which is much more popular, we probably have about 1,200 applicants for the rainwater program. So it's not as, the gray water use isn't as prevalent, but we know that there are a lot of people that are interested in doing that.
When you say applicants for the program, that's people who are applying to get a rebate. You don't have to do that. You could just set it up yourself and just not get the rebate.
Yes, and so that's kind of what we're tracking. We look and see who's participating in the workshops. Now, we have many more people that apply for rebates attend the workshops. Rainwater harvesting and gray water use is a little bit more complicated than, say, changing out your toilet. So in order to qualify for those 2 rebate programs, the rainwater and the gray water system rebates, you are required to take it's about a 2-hour workshop so that you can learn about the systems, how they work, what it takes to operate them and to maintain them. And so, whereas a larger percentage of the rainwater harvesting workshop participants do end up going through the process of installing a system, we don't see the numbers in the gray water system. I think a lot of people go and learn there. Partially, it's the way our rebate program is structured, because it's a pretty substantial rebate. It's $1,000 for the maximum of $1,000 for the gray water system rebate. We wanted to make sure that what was installed was permanent and was in the ground. And I think what a lot of people end up doing after they take our workshop is they realize it's a lot of work. You have to think a little bit more about the detergents that you use. You have to use the water right away, so you can't let it sit in a tank because it'll stagnate and get pretty nasty. But I think what a lot of people are doing is they're leaving there and maybe buying a hose that they can maybe redirect their clothes washer, wash water out to. I think that's probably really common. It's not as expensive, a little bit easier to manage.
One of the renewable water supplies Tucson talked about using at one point was what people call toilet to tap, the treated water. We've moved away from that here. Why has Tucson moved away from that idea?
Well, Christopher, we spent about 2 years taking a really good look at this idea of taking the recycled water that isn't used for irrigation. So we have about 4,000 or 5,000 acre feet today of effluent. This is what comes out of the wastewater treatment facilities that isn't used for irrigation. That gets discharged into the Santa Cruz River at points at around Ina Road. That's why you see flow in the Santa Cruz River there. Now that water represents an investment. Our customers have paid for that water to bring it here, then they paid to clean it up after we got it really dirty. Once it got discharged into the Santa Cruz at that point in the watershed or in the basin, we lose control of that physically and legally. And so our first look at this recycled water was purification process and putting it back into the drinking water system. So after spending 2 years looking at what the infrastructure requirements would be, what the treatment process would be, how do you manage the waste product that comes from that, you end up with a brine that you need to manage, and the cost associated with all that, we realized, number one, it's still very costly to do, but the bigger issue, because we've done such a good job at managing our demands here, we really don't need the water for more than 20 years from now. So we thought we'll take a different strategy and change where we recharge that water. So our proposal now is to take that excess water, recharge it into the Santa Cruz River, but in the downtown area. So even though it will go into the aquifer, it will stay within a region that we can control it and manage it and have it available for the future.
The Arizona Department of Environmental Quality has just announced they're doing some workshops and public meetings about changing some of the rules on use of that water. Granted, we're not going to really use it here in Tucson, but other municipalities may in the northern part of the state or other parts of the state. Do you know what those changes are and how they'll be affecting places?
Yes, I think there's a need for this, as I said. I think in the long term, this is a resource that communities are going to have to look at as a part of the water supply. The need arises from the fact that right now, my understanding is that the regulations in Arizona do not allow the direct treatment and purification of that wastewater and put directly back into the distribution system. That's referred to as direct potable reuse. The more traditional method of managing this today is what's referred to as indirect potable reuse, and that involves having some sort of environmental buffer in addition to a treatment process. What we initially were looking at here in Tucson was indirect potable reuse, which would have involved taking that wastewater, that recycled water, recharging it into the aquifer, because that process by itself provides a lot of purification. There's a lot of natural filtration and purification that takes place. Then when we would extract that water, we would do the additional purification of microfiltration, reverse osmosis, perhaps definitely some advanced oxidation to really pretty much zap everything that's in there and have really clean water that's drinkable, and then put it into our drinking water system. These new regulations then will look at this other step of treatment directly back into the system. Other states are doing this as well. There are communities that have already built facilities that allow them to take that wastewater, purify it, and put it back into the distribution system because they don't have a lot of other options available.
You said one of the reasons Tucson isn't looking at that right now is we don't need it. I saw a statistic. The Tucson area is at water usage levels that we saw in the 80s. What did we do to keep our water usage so low here?
Well, you know, when we look as water planners to the future and we talk about this idea of water reliability, water supply is the most important part. So as we have converted from a non-renewable water supply to a renewable water supply, the other thing that we've done is we've continued to invest in efficiency in how we use our water in our community. This is what you see through our rebate programs. So we have been very successful at reducing overall demands. And so the statistic you mentioned that we're using about the same volume of water that we used in the mid-1980s is pretty impressive, but it's even more impressive when you think that we're serving over 200,000 more people. So this is not people just flushing less or taking those sorts of curtailment measures. This is people looking at changing out their toilet fixtures to use more efficient fixtures. We also have a rebate program for high-efficiency clothes washers. The plumbing code has a lot of applications that builds in efficiency in how we use water over the life of a home and a business. So those are all things that have come together to reduce our demands and put us in a really good situation for the long run.
All right, well, thanks for sitting down with us.
Okay, well, thank you for having me here.
The San Pedro River is one of the largest undammed rivers in the region. Keeping the river wild and healthy is a task that government officials and environmentalists have concerned themselves with for decades. Those groups recently celebrated another step in ensuring the river's health. Zac Ziegler brings us the story.
Thank you so much for what you've done here.
About 100 people are gathered on the Ladd family ranch west of Naco, along the Arizona-Mexico border.
The Hereford Natural Resource Conservation District.
Local ranchers, government officials, environmentalists,
address natural resource issues,
and others are here to celebrate the completion of a large project designed to keep the San Pedro River healthy.
We are celebrating the importance.
As the group prepares for the ribbon cutting, Cochise County Supervisor Pat Call makes a request you don't often hear at such events.
This is a working ranch, so if the gates close it when you go through it. If it's open, leave it open. We do have cattle around here, and they know when the gates are open.
A small stream known as Horseshoe Draw passes through this part of Ladd's ranch.
Well, it's coming off the San Jose Mountains in Mexico, and it drains 9,000 acres. This is the main tributary for that drainage, and it goes into the San Pedro.
The drainage washed out berms and caused narrow channels to cut through the ranch. Those narrow channels led to issues for the land and the river.
And the idea here is to keep all this sediment and to stop the erosion, keep all the sediment that was moving downstream into the cut, and also the E. coli, and keep it from getting down to the river.
The project does this by sending the water through a large basin rather than a narrow stream. That basin is 9 acres at its bottom. Sides slowly slope upward, giving the project a total footprint of nearly 40 acres. When the water hits the basin, it slows down and gets exposed to plenty of E. coli killing sunlight. There are other positives for the Ladd family, too.
The side benefit is it's going to stop the flood erosion, and then it's going to recharge the aquifer going into the river.
This is one of 6 projects aimed at improving the health of the San Pedro as it flows through Cochise County.
You'll see how the draw...
The Nature Conservancy, a nonprofit that has been at work in the area for half a century, is overseeing the projects.
Watershed health, it's river health, it's one and the same. Again, different types of projects to deal with different land uses, but all about river health.
The basin at Horseshoe Draw is the second project completed by the group. The first is a series of concrete and rock berms in the community of Palominas. It's a prototype designed to answer a question.
How can we build a facility that can take off the volume of water that's created by urbanized areas and get it into the ground?
Water has less of a chance to sink in when it passes along urbanized ground. The group is allowed to build structures to recapture that water, putting the ecosystem closer to normal.
It is recharging water, but it's more about learning how do we find the best techniques to get water in the ground.
This project also has a side benefit. It prevents floods on the playground of a nearby elementary school. And it could also serve as a model for a similar project on a larger watershed.
Upstream of Sierra Vista, we're looking at doing some projects to slow the flows coming off of a more urbanized landscape.
Sierra Vista is a town of more than 40,000, and the Nature Conservancy thinks a similar project would have great effect on keeping the San Pedro running year-round. Government officials think the work here could be the way to deal with water issues in the West.
There are lots of other places that have similar issues that we're facing here. This is a proven, workable template to help protect small rivers, large rivers, and also to improve the watershed in general.
Joining me now in the studio is my colleague Zac Ziegler. Zac, why is it that the people and the governments in Cochise County care so much about the San Pedro?
Well, it is obviously a natural resource to them, but a bigger reason on top of that is their economy is rather dependent on it. Because that is a federal reserve, the military base there, Fort Huachuca, cannot have any effect on the river itself. So the city takes plenty of precautions, city of Sierra Vista and other governments in the area take some serious precautions to make sure that they are doing all they can to keep that river flowing and keep the base operating at its maximum potential.
What is it that makes the San Pedro so unique?
Well, among other things, it is one of the only undammed rivers in the western U.S., one of the larger ones. There are plenty of migratory bird species that come through the area when they're flying south or flying north for the winter, for the summer, that will use the river kind of as a landing spot, a place to get some water, get some rest, get some food, and then travel along. Without that river, it could be very difficult for those species.
Now, you mentioned birds flying north. This river actually flows north. That means Arizona doesn't have full control of the river, correct?
Yeah, that was something I've heard many times while I've been down there in the past, talking to people such as the county supervisor, Pat Call, or the Cochise County city manager, or sorry, the Sierra Vista city manager, that a big issue for them, they can do all that they can in that area, put in low flow toilets, get rid of front lawns in at people's houses, but they can't really govern what's going on the other side in Mexico. So if the aquifers in Mexico drop, it will have an effect on how the river flows here in the U.S., kind of an inverse relationship with what we see with the Colorado River here.
In addition to this project, there are other things planned for the future that you mentioned in your story. What else is being done for the health of the San Pedro?
Well, they're really watching for the flows. The city of Sierra Vista really takes an aggressive approach on this, watching its water use. They're also doing a lot as far as water recharge there. They are very active in making sure that every drop of water they can possibly get back into the ground gets there, because those aquifers feed the river. If those aquifers are kept nice and full, they will feed the river for much of the year, as opposed to just getting these kind of seasonal flows that often come during the rainy seasons, coming in the winter, coming during the summer monsoon.
Is there anything that can stand in the way of future plans for the San Pedro to keep it healthy?
One of the biggest issues this area has had to figure out how to deal with is its future as far as development. How do you grow in a way that won't affect this area? There have been many housing developments both in Sierra Vista and even further to the north, projects in Benson that have been talked about and really have to go through very rigorous planning if they ever get okayed to get on the board, get going, because of how concerned they are with water there. You see plenty of things such as the lowest flow toilets you can possibly get are what are common across the board in Sierra Vista. You see no lawns in people's front yards there. You notice a difference when you go to public parks there, that it's not quite as green as when you see a lot of places. And then you go on to Fort Huachuca, where all the PT fields are AstroTurf. It's a very different world, and they're doing all they can to really keep that river going, but the future is always kind of the trick.
All right, Zach, thanks so much for sitting down with us.
Thank you.
And that's our program for this week. I'm Christopher Conover. Thanks for tuning in.